Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to our meeting regarding community standards. Again, this is a discussion that's happening. It's very much in draft form. We have our team from our Justice Department and who will introduce the remaining of the team as well. But just before we begin, I would like to acknowledge Councillor Nathan Wright for all of his work during my bereavement leave. Just wanted to say a big thank you to Nathan for stepping in as the chair during my time off. I also just really want to quickly extend my sincere condolences to all of our community who have lost loved ones. It seems that we've been going through such a difficult time in this community, and really just want to extend my heartfelt condolences to each and every one of you, including councillors Helen Miller, Hazel Johnson, as well as Wendelin Johnson. So our thoughts and prayers are with each of you. So thank you so much again for that. That being said, then we do want to go right into our presentation. Again, this is a conversation that we're having around community standards. I know the terminology around bylaws is frightening to a lot of members within our community. So we are really much looking to, changing that terminology to what it could look like as community standards. Again, this is a conversation. This is very much in draft mode. We have our guests here on the line this morning, and at this time, what I'll do is pass it over to our Director of our Justice Department, Barb General, who I will then look to introducing her and her team.
Yes, I'm the Justice Director, and the bylaw program or the Community Standards program is just one of the programs I oversee. So I want to introduce Shar Hemlock, who's the current manager of the Community Standards program. And Tony Bomberry is supposed to be on here, but I have to get him on yet. So he's also one of the workers. Tim Bucci is our staff lawyer, who also looks over our standards as well. And Catherine Hensel is the lawyer that we hired to go through our bylaws to make sure that we're in good shape.
Perfect, and thank you for that, Barb. So we will go through. I know as community members join in on the conversation. Again, the goal is to have more of our meetings live streamed so that we do receive that feedback and engagement with members on numerous amount of topics. I know our last one that we had around the global solution. Unfortunately, I was off on bereavement for that, but I do have received good comments from community members that they like to continue having these live streams. So we will try our best to get to as many as the questions or inquiries or comments that members have. So we will answer those as best as we can as we move along through the agenda. We do have a hard stop time today at 12:30 p.m. We will finish this meeting as we do have another prior engagement for 1 o'clock. So that being said, then I will pass it right over to, I believe it's Shar, who will be starting us off. Good morning, Shar.
Good morning. Okay, there we go. Share screen is up. So Scanos Fuego. My name is Charlene Hemlock. I'm the Community Standards Manager at the Six Nations Justice Department. I've been in this position since September 2020. So I'll be going over the background that reflects the hard work of the previous community standards workers and the director, Barb General. So as well as being vetted through Catherine Hensel and Associates. So to begin, I'd like to mention again, this is a draft. We're looking at draft 3 right now. So to start, this draft was sent to Council September 14th for review and feedback. So that's actually what we're doing right now. This draft is based on previous consultation with the Six Nations community and departments in 2017 and 2018. And I want to mention again, the preferred term for the bylaws is community standards. So as we go through here, we'll be referring to them as community standards. So yeah, so just some background information. So under the powers of the council, sections 81 to 86, band councils have the legislative authority to pass community standards for 21 areas defined in section 81. So I'm not going to stay here too long because I think Catherine has some more background and understanding with this. So I'll let her go over that during her presentation. Yeah, so let's see, go to the next slide here. Yep, and again here, so the process to complete and approve the community standards. So that's what we're doing right now, the consent of electors. So a community standard or bylaw may be made under this section. And then also through the publication of bylaws, the council shall publish a copy of every bylaw. So currently the community standards draft is on the Six Nations Council website for viewing. And I believe it's in the right-hand corner. I did check that.
Just really quickly, sorry, Shar, if I could interrupt. It was suggested by one of our counselors if we can just maximize the screen so it's the writing isn't so small. So I'm wondering if you could just start from the beginning for the slideshow. I think if you just go to slideshow and play from the beginning, that might.
Everything up here on the top for the Zoom is it's covering the it's covering. I can't get to it.
There are three symbols. The one on your left where your viewing gallery is a line. Hit that. It will minimize that for you.
Sorry, community, if you could just bear with us for 2 seconds.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that, everybody.
Okay. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Okay. So you wanted me to start from the beginning here? Or just, I'll just continue because
yeah, you could continue where you left off. I just wanted to make it more visible.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. So the publication of the bylaws. So currently there is the draft copy number 3 on the website, and also we're in the process of putting that up on the Justice page for community feedback as well. So you can access that copy there, or you can come into the office and get a hard copy. Again, just noting that the website is in the process of being formed specifically for the community standards and feedback, but it will be on the Justice website soon. So critical to this process is to receive the direction from the council. So that's what we're doing here. So in order for this to go through, we do need your feedback on this process here. So let's see. Consultation. So previously, like I said, the previous workers in 2017 and 2018 did a lot of groundwork in the community. So consultations of the Six Nations departments. There were 74 people total included in this. And you can see here the various departments that were consulted with the previous community standards workers. So I'll just let everybody take a moment and see here. So along the side here are the dates. So some of these, there was a few consultations, some of them there was one, but the dates are here. So Language Commission, October 16th, 2018, and December 17th, 2018. So here we go with department survey meetings. There was 38 people total here. And these department survey meetings were with these various departments. And again, the dates are here included on the side. And again, I was not involved in this process, but I do have the feedback and the notes. So this is the result of everyone's work previously. So we'll go ahead and move on. Oops, where are we? Sorry about that, guys. So copies of the community standards was delivered to council departments, HCC, and the community. So currently, 81 copies of the community standards have been given out. And that's the hard copy. So this is really important to look at. So the statistics from the surveys being done, this was taken directly from the surveys. So The first one, do you like the idea of a bylaw system? So total, there was 37 people surveyed. 30 of those people said yes, 6 were undecided, and I'm assuming one person just didn't answer here. The bylaws, should they be enforced by bylaw workers, police, or both? So 32 believe that they should be enforced by both, 2 by the police and 3 by the bylaw workers or community standards workers. So there was a lot of comments here too, putting in consideration for rather than community standards workers and police, there be maybe a community committee to oversee this enforcement. And the next one is, should fines and tickets be an acceptable way to enforce these bylaws in Six Nations? So out of this came 23, yes, they thought so. 9 were undecided and 1 said no. So going on the side here, and I know Kathleen will be going over this more in depth when she does her presentation, but there was 3 areas of concern. So most of the people did not just put 3 areas, they put in a few more than 3. But you can see overwhelmingly there was animal control and trash dumping with 21, fire code at 19, next food safety at 17, residency and landlord and tenant were next there at 15, so not too far under that. Housing at 14, water and pollution, air quality both at 11, noise and zoning 8, and pesticides at 3. So you kind of get an idea of what people are looking for in areas of concern. So go ahead and go to the next one. Whoops. Sorry, guys. Oh. So here we go with the foundation. So this is actually taken right out of the community standards. So if anybody has a copy in front of them or would like to look at them, this is actually taken right out of here. So these foundations encourage Haudenosaunee values while still working within the context of the Indian Act. So I really want to make that clear that, you know, that we really want to encourage our values here while maintaining, you know, while working within that context. And also like to mention, before we go any further, that these community standards do benefit all of us, regardless of our age, our income bracket, affiliation to anything, our nation, our clan, everything. So we're trying to be mindful of all beliefs and principles with these community standards. So up here, the intention is to treat the core cause of troubled minds so that behaviors are transformed, is in reference to the infractions. That would be number 12 on the community standards, looking at how we would deal with, I guess, enforcement or deal with grievances. So this is kind of a restorative justice process. We're approaching these infractions in a way that restores peace between the people by having both sides of the matter communicate and coming to one mind regarding restitution and making sure all minds are satisfied with the end result. So that's, if you're wondering kind of what that's in reference to, that would be how these disputes are going to be resolved. Yeah, question?
Sorry, I have Councillor Wendy.
So just in terms of a process, Mark, can we ask questions throughout or waiting to the end of presentations or?
No, I think we should be okay to ask questions throughout.
Okay, I've got a running list here, but
maybe we can divide them up.
So I'll wait till the end. But the one question I have is on the first bullet. I'm trying to figure out the correlation between the standards and what's written here in terms of intended to treat the core cause of troubled minds so that the behaviors are transformed. Like, where's that coming from? I mean, I understand restorative justice, but I don't, you know, the standards in relation to the bylaws are not that. So I have a great deal of difficulty with that line as it's written.
Yeah, so this is taken from the from previously written drafts. So I didn't write this, but I'm my understanding is that it's in relation to the infractions piece of the number 12 under the community standards. So how we are dealing with infractions, how are we dealing with community members that have grievances with each other, and it's through that restorative process.
So sorry to cut you off, and this is my last comment. So this is not at you as the person who's presenting this. I'm flagging this as a red flag. If we're talking about troubled minds, that's pretty loaded. What are we referring to? Is that mental health? Is that criminality? Is that, so I don't think we should be saying that. And, you know, I don't think it's our place to do that. So I'm flagging that as a,
yeah, no, that's, the feedback is good. So anything in here, any feedback that that you don't think should be on here, or you know, all feedback is good feedback. So definitely, you know, we'll take a look at that. And I know going through the standards, some of the wording, I noticed too could change. So there might be questions going through the standards when Catherine presents about some of the wording too. But again, this is a draft, so it's definitely something that we can work with and look at and understand together.
It's just the behaviors are transformed, because that speaks to assimilation, and I don't think that's what we're trying to do, right? We've got a long history in this country of that, and I would think we should steer clear.
And if I could just comment, thank you, Wendy, that language was held over when, imparted from earlier drafts, and when we asked during the consultations for the core Haudenosaunee approaches to dealing with transgression more generally, that's where that language came from, rather than an assimilationist. But I agree that given the scope of the actual community standards, which address like yard maintenance and animal control, it may not, I think the language may be too strong and too evocative. It's more, it's really probably ties more rationally to the type of transgressions that would normally be the subject of criminal laws, which we've kept out of the community standards, at least for the time being.
So sorry, and not to belabor. So I mean, I think, and thank you for that answer, Catherine. I think there's a clear distinction here of what we're doing, because these bylaws are under the Indian Act. So what we're doing is we're following, you know, Aboriginal law or Canadian law. And I've got some issues that I'll bring up later on that. But, you know, what you're talking about is Indigenous law, right? The traditional laws of Haudenosaunee. And we're not the Haudenosaunee Confederacy here, and so I think this is taken out of context. So that's,
yeah, and we'll get to the Indian Act, and that I don't believe that decision has been made that these will be Indian Act regulations, but that's part of the presentation of follow-up.
Again, really quickly, I know I do want to acknowledge Councillor Audrey has her hand up as well for a question or comment, but just as we move forward, before I go to Audrey, if we could utilize the chat for councillors for any questions or comments that may arise, I think that might be an easier process as we move forward this morning. So that being said, Audrey, you have the floor.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. I would like to just back it up right to the beginning, and I think that we need to clearly state to the community what this program is, what it's under Justice. So Justice, I think, needs to be like one of the first things on the first page should be listed, and what programs under it and what is the rationale for this. We have to give the community context of why we're doing this and help them understand what part of justice this is working for. So if you could add that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey. So I thought I was presenting to council, and I didn't realize it would be to the community. So we will be having community presentations and engagements going forward, and definitely probably a little bit more background information about the department. Each department will be presenting to the community. So we do have that in the works. We do want to be doing that. That's going into the beginning of March. We will be for sure doing that. Yeah, so I agree with you that foundation and that background needs to be said, but this was based on just thinking that I was going to be presenting to council, and you guys, yes. But I agree with you.
Our apologies for that, Shar. I think we may be assisting you a little earlier in your community engagement pieces. So Apologies for that. So I'll that being said, I'll lead it back to Shar to continue her presentation.
Okay, so I think we're going down to, yeah, whoops. Okay, so these standards will be reviewed every 7 years. The recommendation reviewed every 7 years and updated where appropriate. So as we said, the version was sent to Hensel and Barristers for vetting and returned on 10/19/2019, so October 19th. So sorry, that should be draft 3, not draft 7. And again, this last part, we discussed that and possibly wording needs to be different here. And again, thank you for those comments. That's what we're looking for is feedback. And again, like Mark was saying, and really letting people know this is a draft. This is not anything that's final. This is in the works. So any feedback is welcome and needed. So again, taken straight from the community standards, some of the, for the Six Nations Justice Department, there is the Haudenosaunee legal principles. So Ganokosha, we have love, Gogyong Yodose, honesty, integrity, Digakasongwe, sharing, the Guyana Gohonge, cooperation, Scano Sanotonyo, inner peace, Gandao, compassion, Oifodong Gashra, trustworthiness, Gaskaonyok, encouragement, Gaihuanko, responsibility, Oifodonge, consistency, and Gagonyo, state, respect. So again, this is straight from the Six Nations Justice and Haudenosaunee legal principles, and it is in the community standards.
Yeah, right. I think that when we first started, I had to add to this because when we started this, we said the ministry is looking for us to use and include our cultural components to any of the programs that we're running here. So when we started with these programs, it's looking, well, what's the philosophical base for us culturally? So it was the Yanshagoa, the Great Law, to see how we can integrate that piece and be inclusive of that. And so when Chase was writing, he took a lot of that writing in there, and it's good that we're getting feedback because we didn't have that before. So we still welcome more feedback in regards to this shaping this draft bylaws. So if people are opposed to it, you know, if there's a good rationale, then we would be totally inclusive of that piece. So just going forward, I just want to make that clear.
Thank you for that, Barb. Just really quickly before we also move forward, I want to acknowledge Councillor Hazel Johnson has a comment in the chat. Her comment reads, "I'm not sure if a community standard regarding the selling of drugs is included as one of the standards. If not, it should be." And also Councillor Audrey Paulus-Bombery has a comment as well. 7 years is too long, maybe 2 to 3 years. And also she recommends that Mohawk is also used in terms of languages.
Yeah, I agree with you. Being Six Nations, it would be great if you know, wherever this goes, if we can include all of our languages. I mean, ideally it would be all 6 languages, right? Not just Cayuga and Mohawk. But no, I agree with you there. Thank you for those comments.
Thank you, Shar. Back to you.
Okay, yeah, so I'm almost done. I do want to get to Catherine. So just going on to the last slide here. So here again, next steps under review of the Six Nations of the Grand River Elected Council, we recommend the next move in forming an ad hoc committee to assist with vetting and I actually can't read what is written here. There's the screen is blocked with all of our faces, but assist with the vetting of the community standards moving forward. So the recommendations, Six Nations Justice Standards Office recommends the Six Nations Council, then again, ad hoc committee be formed as soon as possible. Recommendations to work with the community standards manager on getting community standards draft ready for approval. So yeah, it was just really short and just a little bit of background about what's what's been done in the past few years. And if there's no more questions, I can hand it over to Catherine.
Thank you so much, Shar, for your presentation. Just before I pass it over to Catherine, I also want to acknowledge another counselor's comment in the chat. Counselor Wendy Johnson reads, she cautions regarding incorporating the Great Law. That is not our place. We are trying to dump everything in one basket, and there are fundamental differences. So I also just want to relay Counselor Wendy's comments as well. Okay, that being said, what I'll do then now is thank you, Shar, for your presentation. Again, keeping in mind that these are in draft and there is still very much work needed to see the progress of the next steps. But that being said, then I will pass it on over to Catherine Hensel.
Thank you, Chief. My colleague Zoe Toms will be managing the PowerPoint. Thank you for having me here, and my condolences to you, Chief, and to the other members of Council who've experienced losses recently. It has been a very difficult month. So just by way of background, while we're waiting for the share screen to switch, we were brought on about 1.5 years ago to assist in reviewing this work and making recommendations to draft them. And some of the issues that came up, there are probably two or three main issues. One is the scope of the community standards. To what extent did we want to, did nations want to address conduct which would normally, and transgressions that would normally be the subject of, well, in the, colonial way, the subject of criminal sanction, criminal law, policing, and external court attention. And the decision was made at this point, at least provisionally, to keep criminal conduct and criminal style penalties like incarceration and even banishment, because that goes to personal liberty, out of this set of community standards. Although in the future it's something that the community may want to look to exercising its jurisdiction over in some capacity, but not at this point. And the second main, and this will be addressed in some of the slides.
Catherine, sorry to interrupt you just really quickly. Shar, if I could ask, if you could just stop sharing your screen so that Zoe can put up her screen, please, and thank you. Perfect, thank you. My apologies, Catherine.
That's all right.
Thank you, Shar.
Okay, so, and for the next slide, I think we're past that. The other issue that we looked at is the options for enactment of the bylaws. As Wendy noted, one of the options is to have the community standards enacted as bylaws, as banned bylaws under the Indian Act, which makes them regulations to a federal statute. And that would require the federal minister's consent under ISC, and that is one option. And if we could go to the next slide. The second option, I'll go through all of these options briefly. The second option is the exercise of your inherent jurisdiction, which, as Councillor Wendy noted, does invoke and may call upon, would have to rely on elements of the Great Law and your jurisdiction arising out of there. And that would have to involve, obviously, both the support and engagement and active participation of the Confederacy. So, and we're not sure to what extent that's partly a legal decision for you folks internally within your community. It's a political decision, it's an operational decision, and it may be a matter of timing, and this may not be the time to attempt that. And the third option that we've proposed is sort of a middle ground. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So under the Indian Act option, the Council of what they call a band may make bylaws in 21 subject areas: health, traffic, public works, commercial activities, land allotment, money, and intoxicants. So, just going back to the previous slide, intoxicants may capture drug trafficking or may not, insofar as drug trafficking is also normally attracts criminal sanction and criminal law jurisdiction and powers. So that's something to look at. We haven't included anything about intoxicants in these community standards. So, and this is under the Indian Act, Section 81 of the Indian Act. Next slide. And I think we're getting feedback. If everybody could mute, that would be really helpful. I can hear my voice going. Okay. Ministerial approval is actually only required for financial or money bylaws. Once enacted, a bylaw or these community standards would be paramount over provincial legislation if they conflict with each other. And historically and legally, this is delegated jurisdiction. This is jurisdiction you're exercising on behalf of the federal crown, on behalf of Canada, not inherent jurisdiction. So while it gives you greater control and discretion internally, the legal authority for doing it does come from the federal crown. So as abrasive as those words are, next slide. The second option is to enact these community standards as an exercise of your inherent jurisdiction and your right, which is doesn't come from the Canadian Constitution, but is recognized constitutionally as it's acknowledged, your right to govern yourselves and determine what how you're to relate to each other. That could be expressly stated in the text of the community standards or bylaws. It could be the subject of legal challenge, either from one of your members or externally, if those measures are in conflict with provincial or federal legislation. And but the federal government has recently, over the last couple of years, recognized inherent jurisdiction as a real thing, as a concrete legal regime that's possible in the area of child welfare, as some of you are likely aware. So the door is open for, in our view, for the exercise of inherent jurisdiction in other areas. But as Councillor Wendy's pointed out, that does invoke, it's not perhaps not as straightforward as at Six Nations as it may be in other communities. So next slide. And the third option is to provide notice to the minister of the enactment of your community standards, but disavow any oversight by Canada, which is splitting the baby, so to speak. So that's something that to consider, for council to consider and the community to consider going forward. Okay. So the next slide, we're going to start subject to any questions or comments anyone has about those, these are more complex decisions, the previous ones, not the ones about garbage and animal control likely. Oh, I see Councillor Wendy has a question.
So I'm not sure how deep you're going to delve into this and the option 1 and option 2. But this is huge, and it's not as simple as option 1 and option 2, not here at Six Nations and in our community. And I just, I have concerns how we're approaching it and, somewhat simplifying it. And I don't think, that's your intention, Catherine, or even the Justice Department. But, we're tied because the bigger issues, the Indian Act, we are an Indian Act elected council, right? That's where we come from. That's how we administer. That's what we make decisions based on, is under that piece of legislation. in that legislation, even if we do bylaws, we can't enforce them because there's, there's a lack of recognition for enforcement to do that. Going over for our own jurisdiction, absolutely. I mean, that speaks to the whole sovereignty, everything, and no one can give us that because we already have it here. However, at Six Nations, our original laws and our laws come from the Confederacy, from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So as the elected council, there are two distinct separations there. So to say this one or that one, I mean, we have to, it's the bigger question of where are we going in this community? What are we doing? What does governance look like? And once and for all, talking about, that governance question, because right now we are tied under that Indian Act as long as we're an elected system under that. So it's huge, right? There's bigger discussion, there's bigger questions, and even proposing that there's an option 3 and we meld them together. We can't do that without the traditional Haudenosaunee Confederacy and those laws. And that's why I raised the question about the Great Law, because we can't do that. Certainly, I don't feel I can do that as elected councillor. So I don't know if you want to expand on that, but
yeah, certainly. And when I was asked to do this presentation, it was we prepared it initially just for the Justice Committee, and then it was for Chief and Council, and now it's a larger, and it's a community engagement session as well. These are incredibly, I do have some, I've been working in and around Six Nations since 2007, so including for, HDI and different elements of the Confederacy, as well as through the Child and Family Services and elected Chief and Council. So I have some appreciation for the complexity of the legal situation within your community. And that was, so what I just went, the slides I went, we're intending to flag that issue, but we recognize, and I'm sure Barb recognizes and her team recognizes the complexity, not just with respect to community standards, with respect to matrimonial real property, with respect to child welfare, with respect to criminal law powers, with respect to land regulation. And whether and to what extent Six Nations wants to and is able to exercise and create systems through which to exercise inherent jurisdiction is an enormous question, which the last 15 minutes did not do justice to, beyond flagging that it's a possibility. And the determination, just with respect to these community standards, a determination will have to be made as to whether you're doing it as Indian Act regulations or otherwise. But it's, and it may be a straightforward decision for this council. You're just going with the Indian Act regulations as bylaws. And if it is, then that is straightforward. But otherwise, a determination will have to be made, and recognizing that it's an enormous question and set of issues that is for the community and not for a lawyer from outside to do anything but facilitate as best I can and provide advice in terms of Canadian constitutional law. But you're right. So I think for this morning, it's beyond the scope of this presentation likely to even really properly canvass those issues, beyond noting that that's a determination that the community will have to make going forward, and through council and otherwise, and potentially with, and I know that the potential for, Barb may want to comment on this, the potential for reviewing these community standards with the Confederacy has been raised. But
yeah, I have to say it is very complex, and I think that when we first started in 2017 with these programs, and I remember the leadership at that time was about inherent jurisdiction, and it was about not so much the Indian Act and talking about getting rid of the Indian Act. So us having the responsibility of trying to create something here in regards to a draft is looking at, well, how do we incorporate that's going to be inclusive of everybody on reserve, and what is our cultural foundation for this piece? So that's why we looked at extracting from the great law, the Ganshagoa, to see what are the values and principles that are going to help lead us to them. It's just been, and I'm glad that we so that's the direction we need it from council to say, what is it that you actually want here, right? So I'm pleased with what we're getting, but whether the community likes that stance, I don't know. That's what we have to deal with. And that's the feedback we're going to be looking at, right? So, and we have consulted, and I have presented to the Confederacy 2019 in September, and they did say they would give feedback. So that's where they're at.
Just really quickly, if I can interject, I know Councilor Michelle has a question prior to me going to Michelle. I think, Wendy, I'm glad you raised that point, because as we move forward here as the 58, one of the most important relationships that we've been trying to reestablish is the Confederacy Council. And fortunate that we've been able to have dialogue over these past weeks with the current situation happening in Caledonia, but also in terms of our latest issue that regarding COVID. I think that it was never our intentions to mean any disrespect by any means of what has been transpired in regards to our midwinter ceremonies, as we recognize the importance of those ceremonies and the need for those to go through and happen. So if anything, we come with much respect and good intentions to actually look to the Confederacy Council for how they would like to proceed, and that's just exactly it. And I'm thank you, Barb, for raising that point of it has been presented to Confederacy, and we'll continue to look at this is just one of the many issues that we need to continue to have dialogue on with our traditional governance and what that looks like. I think even around the Indian Act, I know we've had conversations in council at times of what does that look like? That seems to be the biggest question happening, is what does that look like getting out of the Indian Act? And we know that we're already complex here in a very unique community here in Six Nations. So that adding that question upon our complexities is even more work for us to continue to work on. So just wanted to make those comments. That being said, I'll move over to Councillor Michelle.
Thanks, Chief. And actually, you said a lot of what I was going to say. First of all, I want to thank Shar and the Justice for putting these together, because they have been sitting for some time. And I think, as Councillor Paulus-Bomber indicated, we should have given a more thorough. This came about years ago to do this work, and it actually hasn't moved forward. But Chief Hill, what you're saying is, yeah, I think the council needs to have more discussion in regards to, is it community standards? Are we working with the HCC on these? Because I think it is a little premature. I would, be cautious, because even though it's in a draft state, I think sometimes our community gets a hold of certain things and they may think this is actually what we've sanctioned. So I don't know if it's, at this time, we should stop and actually have some discussions on council. Where are we going? Because that's something we've been talking about for many meetings now, and develop that strategy and move forward. And then if it is community standards, we can actually revisit those conversations.
Thank you, Michelle, for your comments as well. I think just in terms of the purpose of the meeting today, again, is to get that community engagement and to see as to the work and the direction. If that means that we may have to go back and shift to another direction, I think we could still at least proceed with Catherine's presentation and the overview, because these are still fundamental issues that are continuing to happen in our community. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the concerns that have come in over this past year, and even further to that, have been around environment. And there's been a lot of environmental issues. We've seen a lot in regards to, as well as illegal dumping, and property owners with items on their properties that don't necessarily belong to them. So we've seen these issues and concerns come in front of council. And so I would suggest, if we can, look to not disregarding, Michelle, your comment, but still very much need to have that council discussion in terms of really strategic direction and where we're headed. But again, I think there's opportune time for us to have those conversations and to really look and delve into what that actually looks like getting out of the Indian Act. But for today's purpose, I think it would still be beneficial for community members to at least see the overview and see the conversation of this morning. That being said, I'm going to pass it back to Catherine in regards to your presentation.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, so next slide, just by way of overview, we're going to be going through some of the foundations, which I think Shar has already canvassed pretty thoroughly, and we have the feedback that it may be, depending on which direction council chooses to go and the community chooses to go, it may be appropriate to have more or less in that area, but we'll go through that. Land protection and preservation, not with respect to land title, but more with respect to the maintenance of actually already held lands. Environment, which goes along with land protection. Animal control, and that's been identified as a primary concern. Residency, a potentially contentious issue, of course, but it is addressed in the community standards. Trespass, and landlord and tenant relations and obligations. Special community events, fire codes, restaurant management and food safety, building codes, business standards, community standards infractions, and the establishment of a community standards tribunal. So you don't have to go out to Brantford and hand them a Six Nations law. So with respect to foundations, again, we have the feedback, and in terms of the decision making and the decision tree, it will depend in part on the direction that council chooses to go and the community chooses to go. But we have the feedback that treat the core cause of troubled minds so that behaviors are transformed is likely too strong a language, first of all, with respect to, animal control and garbage management, and potentially also too evocative of the Great Law and other Haudenosaunee inherent and sacred laws. So the second principle was we shall treat everyone as a member of the same human family. Again, these are overarching, or were described to us anyway as overarching legal principles with respect to in the application of an interpretation of the Great Law. And once again, the first foundation that we've gone into it, that Haudenosaunee and customary law form the foundation of the standards. That is a decision-making point. Recognizing and affirming the inherent treaty rights of Six Nations. Another decision-making point, whether and to what extent that principle wants to be cited or used in the application or exercise of this legal authority. And an acknowledgement that these community standards are transitionary in nature and mark a step towards restoring a system of complete self-governance. Potentially not as controversial, just how it's going to play out, maybe the difficult part. And we have the feedback that the 7-year review is for the time being, as these community standards potentially roll out and are applied, that may be, at least at the outset and potentially in the long term, too long of a period. Although if you are going to, just one practical concern, if you are on an ongoing basis going to have a mandate to review the bylaws every 2 or 3 years, then resources should be set aside to have somebody coordinate that and undertake the work for community consultation, engagement, the political and legal processes involved in that review, and actually doing the drafting for any proposed amendments to the community standards. So they are intended to restore peace between people, restore and preserve natural world for generations to come, and assist the community members in following the path of the Creator. And one of the things that Barb described to us and others along the way is including some of this language There has been a concern as to the extent to which people will recognize and acknowledge their obligation to comply with these community standards. I think the thought was that referencing these principles might assist in that regard, but it does draw on elements of the Great Law, the Haudenosaunee Law, and areas to which it's clear that the decision hasn't been made at a political or legal level to incorporate them. So that's acknowledged, and that'll be a decision, a more complex decision going forward. Next slide. And Shar has already gone through these legal principles, the Haudenosaunee legal principles. We've described this as a fusion of the Indian Act and Haudenosaunee legal principles, and that likely is not an appropriate way to conceive of this, because that such a fusion would be antithetical to the Great Law, but at least as far as I understand it. But there is an attempt to integrate them, to integrate elements of them. Okay, next slide. Okay, with respect to land protection and preservation, the purpose of these community standards are to build into policy our beliefs that the protection and preservation of our land and territory are responsibilities and commitments shared by us to our future generations. These beliefs are built into policy so that the health of Six Nations lands and territory are protected and preserved for future generations. So, and that purpose is to assist anybody trying to interpret and apply the laws in as to how they are to be applied. Next slide. In land protection and preservation, the areas covered, again, doesn't touch on title and disputes with the federal or provincial crown or anyone else with respect to the acquisition or use of your lands. But so it's waste management, garbage, in other words, hazardous waste management, chemicals, amongst other things, private landfills and holding areas, air pollution, and water pollution, all of which have been identified by and in the community as live issues where regulation is both needed and absent right now. The next area, next slide. Just if nobody has any questions or comments with respect to land management. The purpose of the environment sections or standards is builds into policy our traditional responsibility toward nature, so the environment is beautiful both now and for years to come, and so that our future generations may enjoy the benefits of a healthy, beautiful environment. And this covers the issues and topics covered are visual pollution, noise pollution, changing the environment in terms of waterways, swamps, forests, and greeneries. So forestry practices, clearing forests, digging new, filling in swamps, that sort of thing. Blocks of land and the change of use process for basically it's amounts to zoning, the equivalent of zoning. Okay.
Just really quickly, if I can interrupt really fast, Catherine, I just want to make a clarifying point of, the Justice Department, Barbara and her team are going to be looking to further engagement sessions. So I just want to clarify that piece of, we want community, the goal of today is really to join in on the discussion and where we're going in the direction that we're headed. But also to recognize, and it's simply giving the awareness of the ongoing activity and where we're going with this particular file. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you, Chief. And I'm just, and what we haven't done here is really drilled down and replicated the entire content of the standards. And we can, through the community engagement going forward, we can and will do that. Just the nitty gritty. This is to give an overview of the areas that are addressed and an idea of how they're addressed and why. But we can, you know, if people have specific questions, we can take you to the content of the standards themselves. So animal control, and again, this was raised as you're, you know, as I'm sure everyone's likely aware, with respect to the need and current inability to regulate with respect to the care of pets and livestock at Six Nations, and concerns about strays, concerns about dog bites, and concerns about neglect and abuse of animals. So the purpose of this community standard builds into policy the belief that all animals on Six Nations territory be treated with dignity, respect, and care, so that domestic and wild animals are taken care of, and residents of Six Nations lead lives without interference from stray or wild animals. And the next slide. And the areas that the animal control standards cover are responsibility of owners, or, you know, we may want to change the language around owner, but for lack of a better expression, pet owners and livestock owners, responsibilities of animal control, the potential for the seizure of animals, the handling of seized animals, dangerous animals, and wild animals. Residency, the community, the purpose of this area is the community standard on residency builds into policy our deeply held belief that we on Six Nations territory have an inherent collective right to determine who resides on our land and in our communities, and a minimum standard of behavior for the members and residents of Six Nations territory, so that members, residents, and others are treated fairly with concern to residency matters, and the responsibility of members and residents are clearly outlined. And the next slide.
Sorry, I just have a question, hand being raised. Wendy?
So as you go through this tonight, maybe you've already done it, but is there any plan to separate these bylaws out? Because I mean, animal control is pretty straightforward. It's safeguarding, right? It's safety, it's protection, things like that. And it could fall into one category and maybe go in one direction. But if you're talking about residency, that's again, a loaded area. It's something that there's a lot of work that has to be done. So I just, you know, again, flagging that we're doing this all in one lump sum, and there's different aspects to these.
And we already took out banishment for that reason, because banishment is, you know, people are going to challenge it if they're banished, and it's a pretty serious, you know, it's as close to jail as you're likely to be able to get for exercising jurisdiction. Residency, I'm aware, in your community and other, particularly Mohawk communities, is it's a serious issue. So it's a serious issue everywhere, but it's a potentially difficult issue to address fully. So I hear you, and that is a decision-making point as well. If you want to include this very loaded and complex area in alongside of garbage and, you know, waste management and animal control, which are, there's some easier things to deal with, and this is one of the more difficult areas.
Yeah, I think if I can really quickly as well, Wendy also raised another good point in terms of that piece. You know, we should really look to, again, you know, as I look down the list here in terms of environment, animal control, landlord and tenant, I think, you know, determine, I guess, you know, which ones could be as a short-term, long-term type of, because we know that, again, the more contentious issues around, you know, residency and land protection and things like that. And I think obviously still we could try to shift and move towards those areas, because again, just those, I'm still thinking of the multiple concerns, and all the counselors know it. They hear it on a daily basis of community members calling them concerns around those pieces, especially around animal control. You know, I know we've even had those discussions through our health department and looking to those pieces. But again, I think that's a key piece, as well as to kind of the ones that are attainable in a short-term time frame, as opposed to, you know, trying to put them all into one basket type of thing. I agree with Wendy.
Yeah, and so there'd probably be 3 piles in terms of the this is the achievable and we're decision to move forward in the short term with respect to like animal control and small waste management. The medium term, which might be environmental standards, not necessarily land use, but more like don't fill in a swamp or a wetland.
Right.
But or there's a process if you're proposing to do that. And the third is with respect to issues around which is a long-term potential going forward, and the exercise of quasi or what Canadian law would view as criminal law powers with drug trafficking, other criminal offenses, like interpersonal or otherwise, anything that's covered, behavior covered by the criminal code or the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, and residency, banishment, and other, you know, other more invasive and intrusive exercise of jurisdiction.
And
that would be the third pile.
Right. Yeah. And see, and I like already how you're framing that. I think in a sense too, because we know that these are going to be hard conversations, right? These are going to be tough conversations to have. But as long as I think we can continue to make baby steps to continue to at least allow, you know, members to join in on those hard conversations and discussions. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. You know, I think if we could continue to at least make, you know, baby steps to at least get to the bigger picture, as we know, you know, it's not going to happen overnight, but mind you, you know, as long as we can continue to, again, going back to Michelle's point of that strategic direction and really, you know, looking at the certain points of, you know, where we can actually achieve the time frame and really start to map out where we're headed with these. But I think if we can at least all agree upon, you know, the smaller ones that we, you know, like animal control, environment, things like that, I think that's where we'll start to gain, you know, some momentum and at least continue to have these hard discussions, again, recognizing that we still very much need the input and feedback from Confederacy and majority of community.
And the other potential areas for the short-term pile, so to speak, maybe that's an unfortunate term, but the short-term goals and more achievable is where there's express federal invitation or even direction to, with respect to matrimonial real property and child welfare. If that's, because those are, but again, both of those areas could also be contentious enough that they're in the second or third category. But there's resources and a tremendous amount of space right now to occupy if the community chooses to do that, if the time is right for this community to begin to exercise inherent jurisdiction in those areas or otherwise. You know, but they're described, particularly in the child welfare area, it's described as inherent jurisdiction, which again, in the short term here may not be an achievable objective, but just flagging that as well.
Thank you for that, Catherine. I'll shift back.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll shift back to your presentation. If there's no further questions or comments, I do want to start to acknowledge some of the comments in our community chat, as well as I believe one of our counselors, but I will get to that piece as we move along.
Yeah. Okay. So the residency bylaw or community standard as it's currently drafted outlines the responsibilities of residents, application procedures for people to reside on Six Nations if they don't currently, nullifying a residency application, complaints procedures, a trespass provision, and the citizenship code. With respect to trespass, it references our right to privacy in our homes, our right to bar entry to our homes and property, our right to determine what happens in our homes, and our responsibility to public property so that Six Nations residents live peacefully. Now, and this is an area where it's not about on reserve or off reserve or within territory, outside of territory. It's more like somebody coming to your house and how do you get them out, or to your yard, how do you get them off, as well as respect to public property within Six Nations. And the next, and it carries methods of giving notice to people when they are committing trespass, in your view, how trespassers are dealt with, and exceptions to the normal or the regular. And I see Wendy has her hand up.
Sorry.
That's all right.
But I'm not sorry. These are important issues.
Yeah.
Trespassing, I mean, is one of those huge areas. And I think maybe it was Hazel that touched on it, but the enforcement piece of it. And I mean, all of the bylaws or whatever we do with these. I mean, but this one especially, I mean, we have heard from police services that this is a huge issue because, you know, if they do it, then where does that come from? Right? Because even on policing under tripartite agreements and how that's governed, I mean, what happens in the courts, what happens with the crowns, what happens in all of that. So it doesn't just stop here. There's this other 3/4 of it that what happens. So mapping all that out, you can't do one without the other.
That's right. And there is such a criminal code offense. There's criminal trespass as well. So coordination would be, and we have had some of these discussions, not with the Six Nations police, but just with members of the team about how do you, if the Six Nations police is called to enforce a community standard, is it going to be up to them whether they also lay a criminal charge pursuant to their powers under the criminal code? And if they do, how do you reconcile the two? I mean, it happens in the outside world that there's bylaws, provincial offenses, and criminal code charges as well, but you can't really have both to the same person for the same offense.
But that's a challenge because it's not interpreted the same, and certainly under the Crown and within the court system, it's not recognized as that. And it goes back to that fundamental difference between Indigenous law, Aboriginal law, Canadian law. Yeah. And I mean, there's all that work that has to be done.
Well, and we've, frankly, in our assessment and analysis on these bylaws, we have done that comparison. That is part of the legal work we did. It's not in the PowerPoint, but the compare and contrast, that analysis we already did as part of our review of the bylaws. But and we can annotate these sections, not this morning, but we can certainly annotate these sections with commentary on that analysis, which will present the options, but it won't necessarily give you answers to what you ought to do or even how to do it. That will be the subject of protocols likely and legal and political decisions being made by the community. So that slide, for example, another gross oversimplification, but that's what we're stuck with today. For landlord and tenant, as you're likely aware, the Provincial Act and Provincial Landlord Tenancy Code does not apply on reserve. As it's been described to us, that does create some problems with respect to relations between people who are renting, tenants, and their landlords, going in both directions, which has led to disruptive behavior and, frankly, unfair treatment. So I think going both ways. So this standard builds into policy the responsibilities and expectations of both landlords and tenants when entering into a rental agreement on Six Nations territory so that both parties are treated fairly throughout the tenancy and have recourse available in cases of wrongdoing. So as it currently stands, if a tenant at Six Nations is evicted overnight for no reason, they have no, it's not clear what their recourse is. They can't go to the landlord tenant tribunal. which is, and we're told it happens, and that there needs to be some measure for people to prevent that type of thing from happening. So the next slide. And by the way, this is true for every reserve across the country, and sometimes things are dealt with, just chief and council have to make a decision, and other times there's actual regimes that are established. But it's not unique to Six Nations that tenants in particular, but also landlords, if they have somebody renting who's not paying rent, who's trashing the property and refusing to leave, how to get them off their CP land or their property, or out of the house that they've built and that they own. So the areas covered are rental agreements, rent, to be a rental applicant, responsibilities of the tenant, and responsibilities of the landlords. Also entering a unit, what happens if a tenant dies, eviction, disposal of tenant property, and dispute resolution. Next slide. It doesn't, and this is for residential properties, it doesn't address the leasing of land for agricultural or commercial purposes. And I know that is also a live issue at Six Nations at times, but that's not something that's covered here. The purpose of special community events standards is to build into policy our belief that those on Six Nations territory have responsibilities towards others in the community when hosting special events, so that the life of Six Nations community members continues peacefully and without disruption. Okay, so there's an application if you're going to hold, and there's numbers thresholds off the top of my head, they're not springing, but there's an application applicable to a certain number of people, and if it's over, I think it's 500, then it's a different application and it's a different process, but it's intended to be responsive to, there's all sorts of different events and crowds, frankly, crowd management and that sort of thing that happens at Six Nation due to the size and location of your community and the events that are held there. And this imposes a requirement that if you're over a certain threshold, minimum threshold in terms of number of people, you have to apply for a permit. And if it's over a higher number, I think it's 500, then it's a different permit with a different timeline and different resources that you have to have in place. Next slide. Fire codes. This community standard on fire codes will allow the Six Nations Fire Department the power and authority to provide fire protection and prevention services to the people, the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, which they already do, but it gives them legal authority to do so. Next slide. It covers standards of service, responsibility of residents, fire suppression, and fire prevention. So it's a fire code largely reflecting the standards that the Six Nations Fire Department already has transmitted it through both the province and the federal government, but and it's intended to maximize safety and give them the authority to do that and impose minimum requirements with respect to fire prevention. Restaurant management and food safety. And I don't know whether this goes in the first group of short-term achievables or the second group. Minimum because of the number of food services that you have on reserve, but minimum standards to reduce and prevent foodborne illness and safe food handling practices and keep community members of the Six Nations territory safe from the spread of disease and illness through food. And it contemplates basically a licensing regime around food service, the initial application for that, food handler certificate, management of food handler certificate, inspections, and minimum standards. And we'd be happy to hear whether this falls into the first or the second category, in your view. As important and potentially straightforward or whether it's going to be controversial and require more work. Building codes. The community standard builds into policy a mechanism to protect public health, safety, and general welfare as they relate to the construction and occupancy of building and structures. Provincial building codes do not apply, as you know, on your reserve, and federal codes, such as they are for residential properties at least, are not enforced and insufficient. So there's a building code standard, covers contractors, and the national code standards with respect to buildings. Business standards. And again, I'm not sure whether this falls into category 1 or category 2. Its intention, though, the purpose is to protect public health, safety, and general welfare as they relate to businesses located on the Six Nations territory. In addition, businesses on Six Nations territory find success in part due to our collective tax exemption. The use of that exemption in our traditional values creates a responsibility to the community. So, and the areas covered are registration and responsibilities of Six Nations businesses. And so, subject to any comments or questions we have right now, I'm going to move into what happens if there's an infraction, or, you know, how that's addressed through community standards. Okay. So infractions, this area identifies the approaches that are used to teach us that none are beyond redemption and that change for the better can happen. That may not be appropriate language to use with respect to waste management and animal control. It's again tied back to the underlying legal foundations arising from inherent jurisdictions. So we'll flag that. I'm just going to go ahead and proactively flag that, the latter part of that sentence. This approach treats everybody as a member of the same human family and is designed to handle all matters fairly and without bias. Through mediation and other methods, this approach will relieve people so that they can be trusted to stop harming others and themselves so that we can live together peacefully. This language can be modified to take out, to render it more appropriate if the scope of the community standards is narrowed, even further narrowed to address less transgressive behavior and more regulatory behavior as well, but keeping the underlying principle that mediation, if it is a dispute between neighbors, for example, and it's not a clear violation of some code, then perhaps some mediation may be appropriate. Yes, Councillor Wendy.
Yeah, and I know so much work has gone on into this, and I really appreciate that, both from the Justice Department and the work that you've done, Catherine. But as we go further into this, it's just, for me and my perspective, it's glaring that so much more work needs to be done. And I tend to go back to Councillor Michelle Bomber's earlier comments that it's almost feeling a bit premature. Like I was looking through it and, okay, let's go, and that's the awareness, as the chief has said. And I think that's important, but it just feels like we've tried to put everything together and put under this umbrella, and it doesn't fit, it doesn't match. So presenting it the way that it is, just, I think it's raising all sorts of issues and concerns, and I think it has to be mapped out completely differently. Even presenting to us as the elected council, I think it should have been mapped out differently. I mean, we have a community plan that had extensive engagement and conversation with communities, and it's a piece that's extremely well done, and it lays all of this out. I mean, that's a framework that could have been used to talk about these pieces and where they fit, as the chief had said, whether it's, you know, immediate or medium, long term, all of those things. So I'm really concerned, and I know I actually wrote down your reference to gross oversimplification, because I think that says it in a nutshell. And so, you know, the pieces that you're pointing out, that we have to change the language because it doesn't fit for animal control, but it fits over here. And, you know, I just, there's a lot of caution. So I think it's really premature, and we have to go back and look at how this is laid out and the approach that's being taken to it.
And it may be helpful to share the framework that you have with us in the work plan on it, in order, like, to just have a further session. We can just discuss it going forward, but so that we're aware of that as we're providing our feedback and drafting and revision.
I'm shocked that that wasn't a fundamental piece in the work that you're doing. The community plan is the Six Nations community plan that was done, Help Me Others, 2019, 2018. It is our overall Six Nations community plan. It's a public document. It's on everybody's website. So it's been circulated pretty widely.
Okay.
Just if I can really quickly, I just want to interject. I see Councillor Audrey has her hand up as well.
Yes, I share the same concerns. I think if the community were to see this all in one package, they would be overwhelmed. Because I would think that you would approach this in a different way of like by pieces, things that belong together, and you deal with that and get a lot of engagement from the community. And I think that the community engagement has to be really looked at now in order to get everybody's voice, or many voices as we can possibly get on this. But for anybody who sits down and reads this, they're going to be overwhelmed and they're going to put it to the side. And then when we go to enforce it, then you're going to see all the objections come out then. I would rather the objections came out ahead of time so that we can deal with them and revise these community standards as we go along. But to me, it's an overwhelming document. And also human family, I'm kind of opposed to the word human family. And also I think we need to look at the word fairly and equitably. So we need to know what they mean and to use them at the right times. And I think sometimes it is equity that we're looking for instead of fairness. So those are my thoughts for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Audrey. I do want to now shift over to Councillor Nathan. Question or comment?
Thanks, thanks, Chief. And yeah, I was going to wait to the end to comment, but I think, you know, Wendy's raising and Audrey's raising the good points of, sorry, this might be a little premature in terms of how we engage the community. So I just wanted to jump in now and also acknowledge the work, because there's a tremendous amount of work that went into this. So, you know, Nyawa to Barb and her team, as well as Catherine, you and your team for pulling this together and getting us thinking in this manner. Because my mind goes to the work that we have to do and situate this around governance. And this is all about governance. And it's been talked about by previous councillors about, you know, pulling in not only the people, but also, you know, the Confederacy and all this work, because that's where we really need the unity. And I'm hearing councillors say that, you know, and we need unity around the work, because these are the issues that I'm hearing from the community at large, you know. From the standpoint of some of the issues, and they're looking for us to provide the solutions. So I appreciate that, you know, the thinking has been going, and we've gone so far as to do the thinking around some of the solutions, but I think it's how it's packaged. So I always talk about, you know, creating space, and I think that's our job as the elected council, is to create the space for these standards to come forward. And that's back to our role of governance. And we really need, you know, Confederacy to come along and you know, lead with us on this work. So I've talked about it in the past about building that bridge for governance. And I believe the environment really is going to help us in a long way in building that bridge, the work that we have to do on the environment. And I see environment as being, you know, that catalyst of us being able to have governance discussions with the community and with the Confederacy going forward. because I think, you know, Mother Nature, natural law, and the destruction of the environment, that's not going to wait for us to finish our governance conversations.
Mhm.
So that's pushing us in a lot of ways to create that unity and having that that work that we have to do in the long run. So I just kind of leave that there in terms of our role and how we move forward is we really have to create the space for this. And that goes back to our strategic plan that Michelle spoke about earlier. The other piece too that kind of concerns me in this work is the use of the Indian Act. And I'm a proponent and you know, the reason why I chose to take this path and be a counselor was to ensure that we're getting out of the Indian Act in everything that we do. I don't want to see us further entrenching ourselves in the Indian Act because, you know, that does not serve the 7 generations ahead of us properly. So when we think about how we manufacture this and we create the space on our governance side, we have to do it in a manner that doesn't entrench us further down in the Indian Act. What we should be doing is thinking about ways to get out of the Indian Act and propelling this work forward in that manner. And the final point I'll make, and I agree wholeheartedly with Wendy and Chief, that we need to think about this in terms of the short, medium, and long term, because there are things that we can do that make sense. So let's look and compartmentalize that in the short term. And then I agree, the environment stuff, that should be kind of put in the long term. And then the stuff about residency and the harder stuff where the criminal, we start intersecting with the criminal code, that stuff's the long-term area. So it makes it easier for us as a governing body to work with the community if it's kind of constructed in that manner. And my final point is that's the way I think as we look forward, we have to start looking at it short, medium, and long. And when we engage the community, I think it's easier for us to kind of have that dialogue and have that safe space for the community to have that. And my final point is, you know, I've been hearing from community members just on the standards and what ought to be done, and just raising 2 issues that I heard this week loud and clear was, you know, how do we deal with land and the large landowners? And I don't have a solution right now, but I'm hearing that is a perpetual issue going forward because it does link to housing, it does link to well-being. And I know it's a very, very difficult discussion for us to have. And then the other one that's been propping up, I know Councillor Hazel Johnson has brought this up, is how do we deal with industry coming onto the territory? And we know community members don't want industry next door to them. You know, that speaks to the pollution, and really what it's talking about is commercial zoning. So that discussion needs to be kind of harnessed into this as well. So I do appreciate the work, and I agree wholeheartedly with my colleagues around where we need to go. And this is a very important discussion, and I think it can propel a lot of things in our governance pieces. So yeah, I'll go.
Now and Nathan, for your comments, all really great points. And again, we have to agree there's much work on this file that needs to happen. But I just want to shift back, Catherine. I think you may have had a comment maybe to Nathan's subsequent.
Yeah, I just and one of the larger issues as well that we'd flagged, and just as an issue, but for discussion, potentially at a committee level. Initially to get advice to council and to the broader community and clarify options is, and it's not just with respect to municipal style, like animal control, waste management, that sort of stuff. And even the larger issues that are criminal, there's so many other areas where if you're going to establish, for example, a dispute resolution process that has binding results, like a court basically, or a tribunal, you don't want one just for animal control. You don't want one just for matrimonial real property. You probably don't want one because your community, you shouldn't have to replicate the different areas that the outside non-Haudenosaunee world creates and operationalizes, and all the resources attached to that in various ministries. you're a large community, but you're still relatively small. So there's a potential to integrate operationally and to some extent legally a bunch of different areas and do it in a way that's more, the integration can actually add to the integrity of how that all operates, because it's mutually, there's nothing, it's false to separate criminal from child welfare, from economic, from like these are all interrelated things. And there's tremendous potential for, given the size of your community, both in the fact that it's relatively large and relatively small, to integrate all of or many different areas of collective decision making and dispute resolution. And these are all beyond the scope of the presentation this morning, obviously, but just to flag those, flag the potential for that as maybe a fourth category of either very long term, or if there's low hanging fruit that goes in the short term, along with animal control, you could integrate those in, because you don't want to have, like, for example, we're talking about a registry for documents for matrimonial real property. We don't want to have a registry, a bylaw registry with a building and staff and or office and staff, and an MRP registry with building and staff when they may only get 10 files or 10 applications a year. You could have the same people doing that if you have the laws in place. Similarly, if you have a tribunal that's with members that understand your community, your laws, and how all of it interacts, and these particular, I don't want to say challenges, because they're just elements of your community's history and present that are not the same, they're unique. Then they would hopefully be able to sit on a tribunal or participate in a dispute resolution process in many different areas, if they're people that you trust and that are trained in all the different areas of law that your community develops and seeks to enforce. That is a much larger issue. It goes beyond animal control and waste management, and of course, you know, is beyond the scope of sort of the work that we did on this, beyond raising it, that you don't want to have 7 different registries and registry officers for different kinds of applications and enforcement processes, because that's going to be tremendously expensive, and they need to know what each other are doing, and they could probably be the same 1 or 2 people given the volume. So just putting that out there before we get to the tribunal section.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I see Councillor Wendy.
I'm just wondering, I mean, I don't particularly like the word integration, but I understand what you're saying, but maybe different terminology. But the other thing is, in doing this work and where you're now going in some of the discussion on the whole system, I mean, there are communities that are way further ahead in doing this work and actually have successful models working, like Haudenosaunee and Haudenosaunee and so on. So have we done anything working with them and taking a look at those models and incorporating some of that work into this as well? Because I mean, I don't think, because certainly within, you know, the Iroquois caucus, I mean, that's what that's meant to do, right? Is to share some of that information and knowledge.
Yeah, and I've worked with some of those communities in the jurisdictional field and in child welfare, and I know Barb as well has looked at what they're doing there. We haven't been asked to or decided to integrate any of their methods and the systems that they have in place because they are sufficiently distinct from your community for the time being, except with respect to matrimonial real property. There has been discussion about potentially, and for the last probably 3 years, discussion, but no actual steps taken, I think, to potentially work with a common tribunal system and even a common matrimonial real property law.
I would beg to differ on that, Catherine. I think it's arguable because the stuff that Haudenosaunee done on restorative justice and their own court system, I think there's definitely similarities and there's a model that we can take a look at it and use. So I wouldn't wipe it off the table quite so quickly.
Yeah, I just have to add that we have referenced Haudenosaunee court, but again, you know, the whole idea of having a court or tribunals on reserve right at Six Nations is the momentum has picked up since December. So it's like, okay, so I'm actually talking with them again and looking at their model, and because they're consulting with me right now. But in regards to the bylaws, no, we haven't looked at theirs. But I know she said that they had a lot of controversy, the same thing in getting those bylaws off the ground and approved. So it's a process in itself. For every community, it's going to be different depending on the different factions and the diversity in the community. So it's we can go and do what we have to do here, and they can. And I have discussions with them, and they said we have faced the same things, but you're going to have to go through that. Basically, that's what I was told, and to get what you want. And our community might not be as big, she said, but it's the same issues. People are going to have issues with everything you do in regards to governance, in regards to creating laws, creating community standards, and you have to go through it. That's it. And you know, and I mean, it's really my biggest thing is getting community feedback for these community standards. No, I think we needed a draft. We needed a basis to start from. And what is what is realistic going to work for everybody here? Trying to shape that piece for everyone here so it's agreeable. And I think what we wanted this direction right from the beginning. Nobody has done community standards at Six Nations ever before. Like, well, we have old ones, but contemporary, we haven't seen somebody write these standards. So it's trying to get writers to do this, but not really having the background, right? They're looking at different models, municipal community standards. And I know that they also had Cont'd Indian Affairs to see what the standards were out there for other First Nations. They looked at those as well. So they have their research, and they're trying, and then looking at what was available, trying to shape it from our cultural perspective from this community. Is it going to work? We don't know, because we didn't have any input. So that's where we're at. We're at the stage of really critically looking at what we have and making sure that we incorporate feedback from council and from community. That's all I can tell you right now.
Mark? Okay, thank you, Barb. Helen, Councillor Helen?
Okay, yeah, I agree with everything that people are saying. I myself was quite overwhelmed when I read all of the community standards, and I seen a lot of overlap, and I seen a lot of things that I know the community would be concerned with. But I know Barb's department, they did extensive community engagements before they even started writing the community standards. She had a team that went out and did a lot of community engagement, because I went to a couple of the meetings and listened to what people had to say. So I know they've done a lot, but I don't think the whole document as we're reading today has been out to the community, but I'm not positive. It goes back years, like years ago, before Ava was chief, when we had our justice committee run by Roger Jonathan, we traveled all over the country looking at all the different courts. We went to 3 or 4 different places. We went to Toronto to see their Aboriginal People's Court. We went everywhere. We worked with the court system in Brantford extensively, trying to see how we can get them to recognize our laws. We worked with Geth and Edward. We met with a lot of judges. We did a lot of research. But the problem is, whenever we do that kind of stuff, it seems that then the subject of court just kind of fell by the wayside. It depends what council's in there. And nothing was really done with any of the research that we had done. I remember I even had Misty Anthony from down in the States. She's a lead in the Aboriginal drug courts, and she goes all over the United States setting up courts. I had her here speaking about how she set up courts, the drug courts, and thinking of, giving us ideas of how we could do something here. But like I said, whenever we do something like this, it just kind of, and everything we did fell by the wayside. We never did anything with it. So there's been a lot of work done. It's just a matter of gathering it all together. As far as the community standards, I have so many concerns with them. I could probably take up the meeting myself half the day, raising my concerns. So I just agree with Wendy and everybody else. For me, I see a lot of overlap, and I think it needs to work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Helen, for your comments. I want to shift back to Catherine to look to, I'm not sure if your presentation is almost complete or not. And I do want to get to some of the comments or questions that have been coming in from community as well. If I don't get to all of them, we will, however, our communications person will be copying them and forwarding them all on to Barb and her team, just so that they have it for their records as well as they continue this work moving forward. So back to you, Catherine.
Sure. The only area that we have left is with respect to tribunal, and keeping in mind that it is, actually, if you want to go back to infractions, I'll just talk about the area that it covers. Initial complaints under the community standards. Notice of complaint, phase 1 involves self-determined solutions. Phase 2, investigation. Phase 3, potential for mediation. Next slide, phase 4, warnings. And then there's a tribunal process, which is outlined in the next slides, fire infractions and fines and other infractions. And then moving on to the tribunal, the Community Standards Tribunal, and I referred to that earlier. It's responsible for hearing and resolving disputes, complaints, and violations of community standards in Six Nations territory. And that is where somebody hasn't agreed that they've breached the community standards and don't agree as to any potential fix, measure, or penalty even that is going to be imposed. And the community standard, the draft bylaw, right, or the draft text anyway, sets out the composition and process for the Six Nations Community Standards Tribunal, which its composition, there's a review panel process and finality and standard of review, and that's that last part is to make it defensible for anybody, in particular for anybody who's seeking to challenge the fairness of the process under Canadian legal processes. It's Canadian legal, Canadian law, and seek judicial review, for example, from a federal court. So just to wind up, I think, you know, what I'm hearing back, and before we get to comments and questions, what we're hearing is that, and this is subject to Barb's thoughts and the chiefs and everyone else's, of course, that there's several areas that would be, I think, potentially ideally suited to a committee level examination and work and reworking, and development of a specific work plan in that regard. And that's the 3 categories or 4 categories: the easy or short-term, intermediate, and long-term. The potential of intersection with different areas of legal regulation, collective decision-making, and dispute resolution processes. The larger issue of the exercise of inherent jurisdiction versus the Indian Act, and continuity in that regard, and as well as part of that, and an important part, the best way to engage the Confederacy, both to invite their review and potential participation. That's what I've, based on the comments and feedback and questions that people have had. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Catherine. I'll now look to opening up for any further questions or comments from Council. I see Councillor Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, Catherine, in terms of your reference to engaging the Confederacy and potential involvement. I think we have to look at this a different way and communicate it a different way. I don't think it's an option. We can't do this. We can't go forward unless we have those discussions, unless we're at the table, because the Confederacy has to be very much a part of this process, and hopefully they choose to, because it goes back to the 8 points of jurisdiction. There's bigger discussion that has to be had, and we can't go forward with it without doing that. So that is that fundamental first step, unity, because it speaks to what does governance look like, in the next few years.
I totally agree with Wendy. I think, if we've been looking and talking at as this 58th and recognizing the importance of relationship building, and that is one of the probably most important relationship that we need to build and continue that dialogue. Because again, these are difficult conversations, really hard conversations. In fact, some of these items probably should have been in place decades ago. I know that's one of the comments on there as well. However, not trying to focus in on what should have been done, but rather how can we move forward in the best way possible with keeping in mind unity and bringing our community together and what that looks like. So I totally agree with your comments. I do just really quickly, before I go to any further questions or comments from council or others, I do want to just touch on some of the questions and comments that have been raised while being live on Facebook. One of the question is, what about the Mohawk language being added? I know we've got to that question already. Councillor Audrey had raised that piece, so thank you for that. They are looking to look to those pieces inclusive to all of the languages. Comment from community member is, our cultural philosophies originate from our great peace, and these values should be the foundation of our modern community standards as well. Again, just wanted to recognize and acknowledge some of these comments being made from members of our community. Another comment reads, there's already documented an apparent racism in the judicial and policing in these areas, and the lawyers that would support anyone in these systems are immensely ignorant of Haudenosaunee peoples and law. All that would need to be addressed before any of these options would become viable. So again, I think talking on some of the pieces that have been raised in the discussion thus far. Another comment reads, we also need to look at the word inherent, as it has its own implications. I think, again, looking to these, and again, further, I want to clarify again, further engagement is much needed and going to be happening throughout Barb and her team as we move forward in the best way possible. Another comment reads, maybe it's these bylaws in quotation that will actually bring unity. Wouldn't that be ironic? Another comment talks about, the 8 points of jurisdiction. So these are all, conversations that have been had in previous leadership in looking to, in the past. However, we need to look to actionizing what exactly we want as a community, and to actually look to all community members and their opinions and what they would like to see our community move forward in. Another comment reads that animal control does not include wild animals either. You do not control wild animals that is under hunting jurisdiction. So again, these are all just comments being posed by community members. Again, our communications team is going to be looking to having all these comments recorded and passed on to Barb and her team as they go through even further engagements on this piece. I think, the conversation, and going back to Councillor Michelle's earlier comment in terms of, strategic direction and strategy and where we're going, as well as Councillor Nathan and his comments and the bigger picture, and Wendy and others in terms of, the bigger governance piece. The last thing we want is to see this as any disrespect to Confederacy. We've been really working hard to make sure that the first and utmost thing is respect for what the Confederacy means to our people and the role that they have to play, or the role that they do play rather. And I think that this is important as we move forward. Again, tough conversations, really, really tough conversations, but at least we're starting to allow community to join in on discussions and conversations as we move forward. I think it's important that we continue these types of sessions as we move forward. Just want to really look back to if there's any further questions or comments from council at this time. I see Councillor Nathan.
Thanks, Chief. And you laid it out in terms of next steps and the summary of where we need to go perfectly. So I just wanted to kind of underscore that particular piece, and just kind of leave council with the kind of areas in terms of our responsibility, because we've heard it's about unity and it's about creating the space for this to work. And that speaks to a lot of our responsibilities going forward. I guess before we leave this conversation too, I just wanted to underscore and leave my colleagues with a thought, because I raised this once and I got pushback, but I'm going to raise it again in terms of the work that we have to do in making it one of our strategic priorities to get out of the Indian Act. And I know how hard that is, but if we start taking it in terms of what those baby steps are, and start walking along that path, that's going to help with our governance discussion. That's going to help with creating unity within the community. And if we do it in a strategic manner, that doesn't hurt us, that actually protects us, we're going to be in a better spot going forward. So it's about creating the space for making this to work. It's about creating the space for community members to come on board and be enthusiastic about this. But it's also about getting us out of that archaic act that has killed our people from time and time again. So I'll leave my comments there and just, I'll ask my fellow councillors to consider that.
It's Melba.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Nathan. Again, wholeheartedly agree with them. I'll shift over now to Councillor Melba.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this to our attention, Barb. I know you've been working, as Helen had said, in the community for a long time. You get a lot of calls and wanting for help in certain areas, and now you have the standards. And I thank your team too that's working along with you. I really think this is part of the great law. It really is a way of life. And we've gone by the wayside, and I certainly agree that we have troubled minds. We don't want to have troubled minds. We have disturbances. We have different behaviors that we, I guess, didn't have some years ago, at least to the extent of where it's at. So I really agree that it's been a good dialogue today. It's very thought-provoking and good comments. And I think we should move along with this. And I agree with there's some areas that can be short-term and long-term and different people involved in it. So I want to thank you for that. I think it's really important, and it's going to bring our people closer together. And it's going to remind our people that all these areas need improvement, which will result in more harmonious relationships of safety and caring for one another. I see the peacemaker you have in your opening. I think that's very important, and I do believe like Gathan Edwards is assisting in those kind of things where they're looking for alternative and of course restorative justice has been mentioned. It's really important that we accept and assist one another in any way we can. And we need to look at ourselves. Are we doing that? We are counselors. Yes, we meet quite often. That's a big assistance to the community. But are we doing that sometimes in our private lives? Can we do that? Or are we busy making money? Is money more important than people's lives? I want people to look at yourself, and I'm looking at myself too, not just you, that we look at how our way of life is happening. So I do agree with Haudenosaunee values that we should move forward and somehow correct some of these things like trespassing, all those things you have. I think all of these categories are so connected to how we relate on an everyday or every week, month basis. We're all dealing with trespassing. We have those things, building codes, land protection. We're dealing with all of it. So it's been a good dialogue, and I really appreciate it that we're looking at the community and, of course, allowing the community to be involved and having a say in how things are going to go forward. So as we see at the table that we're at right now with Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the one young chief mentioned caring. What's that all about? It's about all of this. Trespassing, residency, animal control. That's a big part of our life, animals and plants and medicines. So I really appreciate today. It's very good to hear that Barb has brought all of these things to our attention. And I will do my best to work with all of council, which I try to do, and everyone else. And I appreciate all the comments, good comments and ideas that have taken place today. Noah.
Thank you, Noah. Melba, I'll now shift over to Councillor Wendy.
Thanks, Mark. And yeah, I just want to support what Nathan is talking about. I mean, I've raised similar comments quite often with council, and I want to put this in perspective. This being the presentation and the information today, the Justice Department, the consultants, and others that are working on this, our SAO Darren and Dwayne, they are resource people to help us map this out, make recommendations, give us points for consideration of what we should be looking at. But I think we have to move beyond program mentality as well. This is much bigger and gets into the whole governance look of how we move forward. And I'm all for sitting down, and I brought this forward in council, that we have to look at our function as an elected council. It's a path that's been mapped out for us and prescribed for us going forward, and map it out in terms of what that looks like with jurisdiction and laws, and take a look at the role of the Confederacy and the role that they have with the Great Law and the original laws of the Haudenosaunee. And I mean, I think we need to look at all of that. And this plays a part of that in terms of lawmaking, how it's implemented, how it's enforced, all of those pieces, but it's that fulsome picture. So that's beyond program mentality. And the work that our departments are doing, I mean, as that resource, it's up to us to make those hard decisions and have those hard conversations of who we are, where we're going, and what we want to be. And someone said it, for the next 7 generations, Nathan. So just wanted to lay that out, and that's certainly my perspective going forward. We have to change how we do business, because this is not reflective of who we really are as Haudenosaunee people.
Thank you, Wendy, for your comments as well. I do want to look to if perhaps Barb or Catherine have maybe any closing comments that they would like to make. So just I'd like to give them the opportunity. Maybe I'll shift over to Catherine first, and then I'll shift over to Barb.
Thank you, Chief. It's been a pleasure as always to meet with you folks. I think it's clear that there's bigger issues that are beyond technical or technician. And as technicians, all we can do is point to the fact that they exist, but they're not for us to resolve. We'll just support and facilitate as much as possible, and basically, as always, do what we're told. Because I'm shoes popping, I'm not, as I said before, it's not my place as a consultant and as a technician to do anything but support and provide technical support on these issues. So thank you. It's pretty clear that there's sort of a matrix of decision-making points, some of which we can support and some of which we can't, because they fall squarely into and exclusively into governance and larger community issues. So we'll be sending our notes over to Barb and our sort of analysis and assessment on that for your use as you see fit. And and hopefully with real focused committee work, more prepared, some of the issues can start to be teased apart in a way that's not overwhelming, as many people have said, and can actually resolve some of the smaller issues and take it apart so that as much as can be resolved in the short term as possible.
Perfect. Now, thank you, Catherine. I'll now shift over maybe to Barb for any closing comments.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the input. This is what we needed, along the way we were doing these drafts. It was so much needed. So because we're just going along doing our thing, waiting for council to give direction, even the SAO to give direction. But it's like now we know and somewhat, I still need to know where your governance stance is in regards to inherent jurisdiction or Indian Act, because I still feel confused on that piece right now. So if you could assert that to me and or Darren can say, this is the direction we're going, this is how the bylaws should be shaped. So that would be more than helpful for us. I think that's where we're at. And I think that we can, like Catherine said, we'll do what we're told. And I know that if you want something, I can give it to you, but you need to help with that direction. Yeah.
Thank you, Barb. And really, in all reality, it's going to be overall community to also help us in looking and achieving that direction, right? And so that's exactly in the spirit of why we've decided to increase and improve our communications and to go live on Facebook and things like that. It's to help generate and to look to more feedback for one, but also to exercise what we've been saying in terms of openness, transparency, accountability, all of those items, I think it's really important to this 58th elected council. And I think, as we move forward, we want to, again, make sure that we're moving forward in the best way with community support. Again, that's difficult at times to get. However, we need to get to as many voices as possible on many issues, inclusive as well to relationship building and making sure that we're dialoguing and having these conversations with our Confederacy Council as well. So, again, there's a lot of work to take place. Just really quickly want to shift over, if I can, to our SAO, Darren, if he'd like to make any closing comments as well.
Yes, thanks, Chief. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody, and I think it was a good discussion. And that's really what it is. It's discussion. And I think that I just wanted to make sure that everybody was okay with that. I mean, we have community involved now, and I think that that's important, and they have been involved. We're a pretty important part of our history. I think we say that a lot, but we really are. And I just wanted to chime in a little bit on this in terms of that governance work as well. I'm here to support the council in any way I can to advance that. And I do agree that with Councillor Nathan and others, that moving away from the Indian Act is part of our self-determination. It's part of our sustainability. And that needs to relate back to some of the comments that Melba raised about our community and how this is all related to how we live harmoniously in this community. It was mentioned about peace in a lot of the comments and a lot of the writings. I think that's important to remember as a principle of who we are, but also harmoniously. So I think those are two pieces that I carry with me. I carry it wherever I go, and whenever I have interactions or relations with staff or others, I try to carry that with me, that sense of value. So I see that it's emerging, and it's definitely expressed within what we've seen today and some of the comments that we've seen today. And just a reminder, like before contact, we lived harmoniously. Our ecosystem was completely different. We've been impacted by outside forces, and our economy has changed because of that. And as a consequence, our ecosystem has changed. So we need to put some standards in place that are acceptable to us. And I think that's the long and short of it, really. And it's not easy work. It absolutely is not easy work. But I like the comment about, doing this work will bring unity. Because if our ultimate outcome is to live in peace and harmony, then that's our guiding principle in everything that we do. And, other people's opinions, other people's laws, other people's regulations will be vetted and changed, or not even used or adopted. We'll have to develop our own. So I think I just wanted to, in terms of my perspective, where I sit sort of between the mountaintop and the treetops in that ecosystem, I just wanted to provide that perspective to not only my colleagues and my leaders, but community as well, for what it's worth. So thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Darian. Very much appreciate your comments. I think, as we move forward, we need to look to our past, right? And we need to, again, have these hard conversations in order to move forward. And I think, that's exactly, what we're trying to achieve here. Again, just reiterating Darren's comments, it's not going to be an easy task. This work is very, very difficult. But again, I think if we can at least do it in a respectful manner to where we're actually listening and hearing from each and every single one of us, you know, we can actually become united and actually move forward in that healthy way in what we know best and what our ancestors taught us and to continue to teach us. So for me, I agree with Darren and thankful for your comments. And again, you know, we want to continue this dialogue, and that's just basically, and I'm glad you summed that up, Darren, is this is a discussion. And, you know, it's nothing is set in stone or concrete. And, you know, we know and recognize that there is much work to be done. And again, just want to say Nyawa and thank you to Barb and her team, as well as Catherine and her team for assisting us as we go through this journey together. And, you know, we need to do this, and that's just exactly it, right? Is making sure as we embark on this journey that we don't leave anyone behind, and that we respect each other as we move forward. And I really am grateful for the conversation today and to each and every one of your comments. And so with that being said, again, just want to say Nyawa for the presentations this morning. And again, to any for community as well, you know, I just want to make sure that I don't want anyone to feel as if their comments are not being heard. We will be recording and forwarding them on. There will be further sessions being for community sessions to provide more feedback and input on this draft and what that looks like moving forward. But again, you know, we want to be more open and transparent, and that's exactly why we have these meetings. So we will continue this along our journey together, and hopefully we can look to that unity piece and moving forward in a good way. So just want to say Nyawa and thank you for the discussion this morning. That being said, I hope everyone has a great day. I know we do have more meetings scheduled, and we will look towards continuing providing as much information and making sure we're bringing community along as we move forward. So thank you, everybody, Nyawa, and have a great day.
Mark,
Oh, sorry, Audrey, go ahead.
can we have a short meeting with council before we go into our meeting this afternoon with?
Yeah, I'll actually just wait for your emails, Audrey, and we'll confirm on that piece as well.
Wait for my what?
On your emails. Your emails we're going to be setting up a Zoom. I'll talk to you off the line shortly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everybody.